Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of Mark. We're still in Mark chapter 4. Today we start reading at verse 33. Now in this chapter, Jesus has been teaching the nature of the kingdom of God with parables of the kingdom. And notice how this is wrapped up in verse 33. Notice what Mark says. Now with many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them as much as they could understand. So Mark tells us that these are not the only parables Jesus told about the kingdom. There were others, many stories he told, many parables he used, many illustrations he gave to help them understand the nature of the kingdom. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. But when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything. Now, it's interesting, he talked to them in parables, but oftentimes his disciples, when they were alone, they would ask him, we don't understand the full meaning here, explain. And he would explain the parables to them. So you might ask the question, why did Jesus use parables if they couldn't immediately understand? Well, let's go back a few verses, and one that we mentioned earlier, but let's go back and examine it in a little more detail in verse 10, when it gives us some of the reason Jesus spoke in parables. Now, we're still in chapter 4, we're going back to verse 10. It says, when he was alone, that is, when Jesus was alone, the 12 apostles, the others around him, the other disciples, asked him about the parables. And he said, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing, but never perceiving, ever hearing, but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. Now, first, we're perplexed by these words. Is Jesus using parables so that people won't understand what he is saying? Well, not exactly. Think of the full context here. Jesus is using parables so that those who desire him will understand, but those who are not interested will only hear a story and not perceive the meaning. In other words, when a parable is told, it illustrates the meaning of the teaching. And so a parable of the kingdom illustrates the nature of the kingdom of God. And for those who desire Jesus, for those who believe in him as king, it illuminates their understanding. They will perceive what it means. But for those who are uninterested, it's just a story. You see, they'll hear the story, but they'll have no desire to delve into the meaning. They'll hear the illustration, but they'll have no desire to understand what is pointing them to. The truth of the kingdom is pointing them to. So the parable, for those who believe, will illuminate and help them understand. But for those who refuse to believe, whose hearts are hard, the parable will hide the meaning, because for them it will only be a story. So the parable is meant for those who want to understand, to help them understand more. But it also hides the meaning of those who do not want to understand, who refuse to believe. For them, it's just a story. So the parable for the disciples brings great understanding of the kingdom. But for the parable for those on the outside who don't want to believe, they see, but they don't perceive. They hear, but they don't understand. The meaning is there, but they refuse to try to get hold of it. So see, the parable both unlocks the meaning of the kingdom, but also hides it from those who do not wish to understand. It's sort of like in that first parable, the seed that fell on the path. Their hearts were hard, never found a place, so the enemy just snatched it away. The word came to them, but they didn't receive it, and so it was snatched away from them. These are those on the outside. They hear the parable. The meaning is there if they just listen, but they really don't want to. So they refuse to hear. They hear the story, but they refuse to hear the meaning. So the parable hides the meaning from them. It just remains a story. So Jesus taught in parables so that those who wish to understand could, if they would believe and listen with their hearts. But those who did not want to understand would hear nothing except an interesting little story. And so that's what Jesus said. There will be those who ever see but never perceive, who ever hear but never understand, and they won't turn and find the glory of forgiveness in the kingdom. But for the disciples, for those who want to understand, Jesus explains everything. And so it is for us. If our hearts want to believe, If we want to understand, then we'll look into the parable and see what Jesus is teaching, and we'll come to understand the nature of the kingdom of God. Okay, join us tomorrow as we continue in chapter 4. We come to another miracle, another sign of Jesus as the King, as the Messiah. And we'll look at that in tomorrow's session. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of Mark.